Jen and Ben, you know, there's consequential moments throughout the course of history where sometimes words just aren't enough. Pearl Harbor, 9/11, just to name a few. For many people who woke up this morning, today was one of those days. So moving past words, people want to know, what actions are next? Thursday, it's morning in America. A different America than it was just 24 hours prior.
Firing rubber bullets up there now. This is nuts.
Joe Visconti, a former state rep, candidate for governor, and political activist from Hartford, was among the masses who gathered on the grounds of the United States Capitol. Although he never stormed it.
Look at they shoved that woman. Look at they just did. They shoved her down.
Visconti called Wednesday both the last stand and a new beginning.
This is the beginning of a new movement. A lot of those people that were not part of the Tea Party kind of want to resurrect it.
Guns drawn at the door of the People's House. An insurrectionist sitting at the well, a member of the mob in the private office of the Speaker. Images that will define the bitter end of a tumultuous presidency. Now we heal.
What would make me sad is if I didn't see our at least our federal officials condemning what happened. And I think you're seeing Republicans and Democrats joining together, recognizing that for a president to refuse for a peaceful transition and to even invite this type of behavior is reprehensible.
Connecticut's new Republican leader in the House was sworn in just hours before the siege to a chorus of protesters at the Connecticut Capitol.
It was the first time in my recollection that type of occurrence happened on opening day. My wife turned to me and said, are we going to be safe in here? And I thought, that's, a crazy question. And then 3 hours later, walking out and watching the news.
Similarly, the new Republican state Senate leader told Fox 61 Connecticut will hold ourselves to a higher standard.
What we saw was civil discourse turn into violence, and there is no place in America, in American politics and American discourse for violence.
As conspiracy theories swirl and rumor and speculation threaten to blur the line between fantasy and reality, Lady Liberty's torch still beckons the huddled masses to a free society, a republic, if we can keep it.
Democracy will survive as it always has, because at the end of the day, I think this is a form of government that people not only here respect, but people around the world envy.
And 4 people died in Wednesday's siege. Dozens more were either hurt or arrested, including Capitol Police. Now, there is some discussion around the 25th Amendment. Should it be invoked to remove the president from office immediately? But with only 13 days left until President-elect Biden is inaugurated, some other people are wondering if it's worth the time and the energy. We're live in Hartford. Matt Caron, Fox 61 News.